He hadn't meant for it to go that far. When Leela stood up in that room as ex-wife's wedding reception, humming with crystal and soft laughter, and said his name the way she did, something inside his chest tightened so hard he had to grip the edge of the table. He could still see the way people turned, the way silence moved. He had brought her there to make someone else feel small. Instead, he was the one exposed, not because she embarrassed him, because she didn't. She told the truth, and the truth didn't spare him. It didn't sound cruel. It wasn't loud. But it peeled something open that he had kept sealed for years. He hadn't prepared for that. He had prepared for anger, for humiliation, not for mercy. The idea came to him in a way that didn't feel like an idea, more like a pressure behind the ribs. He was standing in his kitchen, staring at the wedding invitation that had been sitting on the counter for 3 days. Thick paper. Heavy. His name printed in a script that looked softer than it felt. Adrian Cole. He hadn't expected to be invited. Not really. When the envelope arrived, he almost laughed. It had seemed like a mistake, or a gesture meant to prove something. He hadn't opened it right away. He had left it there, unopened, like it might disappear if ignored long enough. It didn't. The day he finally tore it open, he read it once. Then again. Then he placed it back in the envelope as carefully as if it were fragile. He told himself he didn't care. He had been the one who signed the papers. He had been the one who said it wasn't working anymore, that they wanted different things. He had said it calmly. He remembered that part clearly. He had even meant it, but he hadn't meant for her to marry someone else so quickly, someone with a name that carried weight, someone whose photograph appeared in business magazines. A billionaire, they said, as if that word explained everything. Adrian didn't read those magazines. He didn't follow that world. He worked. He kept to himself. He built things with his hands and his mind and never needed an audience for it. Still, when he heard the news, something sharp had moved through him. Not grief, exactly. More like comparison. It had been months since the divorce. He had told himself he was fine. He kept routines. He ran in the mornings. He fixed small things around the house. He met clients. He answered emails. He avoided mutual friends. That part had taken effort. When the invitation came, he knew she wanted him there. Not out of kindness. Out of closure, maybe. Or proof. He wasn't sure. He tried to picture the ceremony, the guests, the kind of room someone like that would book. He imagined standing alone near a wall, nodding politely, pretending none of it mattered. He imagined her seeing him like that. And he felt something twist. That was when the pressure behind his ribs turned into something else. He didn't think the word revenge. It sounded childish. He thought balance. He thought presence. He thought she shouldn't see him small. The thought came quietly, almost reasonable. He would not stand there alone while she stood beside a man whose watch cost more than Adrian's car. He would not look like he had lost something. He hadn't lost. He had chosen. He repeated that in his head. He had chosen. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling fan moving in slow circles. He tried to talk himself out of it. You don't need this. You don't owe anyone a performance. But the image stayed. Her face when she noticed he wasn't alone. Not desperate. Not lonely. Chosen. The next morning he found himself driving without deciding where he was going. The city was gray that day. Cold wind pressed against the windshield. He drove past streets he didn't usually take, past storefronts he didn't notice before. He wasn't looking for anyone specific, he told himself that. He stopped at a red light near the edge of downtown, where the sidewalks were less clean and the buildings older. That was when he saw her. She wasn't asking for money. She was sitting on a low concrete barrier outside a closed cafe, her back straight despite the cold. A thin coat wrapped tight around her shoulders, her hair tied back loosely, strands escaping around her face. She wasn't looking at people. She was looking at a small notebook in her hands. Writing. The light turned green, but he didn't move right away. A horn sounded behind him. He drove forward automatically, then pulled over a block later. He sat there, engine running. This is stupid, he thought. He didn't know her. He didn't know her story. He didn't know she even needed help. But he kept seeing the way she held herself. Not slouched, Not defeated. He turned the car around. When he parked near the cafe, he stayed inside for a moment longer than necessary. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Why does this matter? He stepped out anyway. The air was sharp. It made his eyes water. She didn't look up when he approached. He had to stop a few feet away before she noticed the shadow falling across her notebook. Her eyes lifted slowly. They were steady, not suspicious, just alert. Sorry, he said, and immediately felt the word was misplaced. She waited. He wasn't used to not knowing what to say. I saw you writing, he added, as if that explained why he was standing there. She closed the notebook halfway, thumb marking the page. And? Her voice was even. Not defensive, not inviting. He felt foolish. He almost walked away then. It would have been easier. Instead, he said the first honest thing that came to him. You don't look like someone who's given up. Silence stretched between them. A car passed. Wind moved a loose piece of paper near the curb. She studied him for a moment longer. That's an odd thing to say to a stranger, she replied. He nodded. I know. He didn't sit. He didn't offer money. He didn't mention the wedding. Not yet, but the pressure in his chest eased slightly just standing there. He didn't know her name. He didn't know that within a week he would ask her to pretend to be something she wasn't. He only knew that when she looked at him, she didn't seem impressed. And for reasons he didn't examine, that mattered. He stayed longer than he meant to. Asked if she'd eaten. She hesitated before answering. He offered coffee instead of cash. That made her pause. Coffee, she repeated, like she was testing the word. He nodded toward the cafe door. It's closed, she said. I know another place. She watched him carefully. He understood the calculation in her eyes. Risk, safety, pride. I'll walk, she said finally. Not ride. He didn't argue. They walked side by side, a careful distance between them. He told himself this wasn't about jealousy. This wasn't about proving anything. He was just being decent. But when he imagined walking into that wedding with someone like her, someone quiet, composed, impossible to categorize, he felt that pressure shift into something almost steady. Not triumph. Not yet. Just possibility. He didn't realize how fragile it was. The coffee shop he chose wasn't far. Small place. Clean windows. No one from his usual circle would be there. He held the door open. She walked in first. Inside, it was warm enough to make his skin prickle after the cold. She stood near the entrance for a second, as if waiting to be told where she was allowed to stand. You can sit, he said, then wished he hadn't phrased it that way. She chose a table near the window. Not tucked away. Not center room either. Balanced. He ordered 2 coffees and a sandwich without asking her what she wanted. That bothered him as soon as he did it. He corrected himself before the cashier finished ringing it up. Sorry, he said, turning to her. What do you prefer? Black, she answered. He nodded. Changed the order. When he brought the tray over, she thanked him once. No softness added to it, just acknowledgement. Up close, he could see she was younger than he first thought. Late 20s, maybe. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that didn't match her age. Not wrinkles, just strain that had settled in. She wrapped both hands around the cup, but didn't drink yet. You're not doing this out of charity, she said. It wasn't a question. He felt the words land before he could block them. I didn't say I was. No, she agreed. You didn't. Silence again. Not awkward, just clear. He studied the steam rising from his cup instead of her face. What's your name? He asked. Lila. He repeated it once in his head. Lila. Adrian. She nodded, like she'd already guessed it. He wasn't used to people looking at him without either expectation or intimidation. Most clients either wanted something from him or assumed he wanted something from them. Leela just looked. You were writing, he said. Earlier. She tapped the notebook, now sitting on the table beside her. I write things down so I don't forget who I am. He glanced at it. That easy to forget? She shrugged one shoulder. It is when people stop using your name. He didn't know how to respond to that. So he didn't. She took a sip of her coffee, closed her eyes for half a second as the warmth hit. He noticed her hands, steady, not trembling, not desperate. "What do you do, Adrian?" she asked. The question surprised him, not because it was unusual, because of the way she asked it. Direct, level. "I run a small engineering firm," he said. "Structural design." "Small?" she repeated lightly. He hesitated. "Mid-sized," he corrected. A corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. He felt something defensive rise in him and pushed it down. "And you?" he asked. "Currently?" She looked around the cafe. "I survive." He waited, but she didn't expand on it. He tried to imagine how this conversation would sound to anyone watching. A well-dressed man across from a woman who clearly didn't belong in his world. He felt the gap between them. And then he did something he hadn't planned. "There's a wedding," he said. She didn't react. "Next weekend." Still nothing. "My ex-wife's." That made her blink once. "And?" He took a breath. "She's marrying someone, visible." Lila tilted her head slightly. "Visible? Money," he clarified. "Influence. The kind that shows up online." "And you're going," she said. It wasn't a question either. "Yes." "Why?" The word hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Because not going would look weak. He heard it as soon as he said it. Weak. Lila leaned back in her chair. "And going won't?" Her voice wasn't sharp. It was steady, almost curious. He felt heat rise in his neck. "I don't intend to stand there alone." There it was. He finally looked at her directly. "I want you to come with me." The air between them shifted. She didn't laugh, didn't look flattered. She studied him the way someone examines a structure for cracks. "You don't know me," she said. "I know enough. You don't." He swallowed. "I would compensate you," he added quickly. "Clothes, a place to stay until then, whatever you need." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "So I'm an accessory." "No," he said too fast. "Yes." He rubbed a hand over his face. "It's not like that." She waited. He forced himself not to fill the silence with excuses. "I don't want her to think I've fallen apart," he said finally. There it was again. Not pride exactly. Something thinner. "And you have?" Leela asked quietly. He didn't answer. Because the truth was complicated. He functioned. He worked. He paid bills. He showed up. But some nights he stood in the hallway outside the bedroom they used to share and felt something hollow press in from all sides. He hadn't told anyone that. "I won't lie about who I am," Layla said. He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to." "You are," she replied. The word sat there. He exhaled through his nose. "I'm asking you to stand next to me." "And say what?" "That we're together." She held his gaze. "Are we?" The question made something in his chest tighten again. "No," he said. "Then why would I say it?" He didn't have a clean answer. "Because I don't want to look abandoned. Because I don't want to look less. Because I don't know who I am if I stand there alone." But he couldn't say any of that out loud. He straightened slightly. "You'd have a place to stay," he said instead. "For a week. Maybe longer, if you need time." She looked down at her coffee, then at the notebook. "You think I need saving. I think you deserve better than the street." Her eyes lifted sharply. "Those aren't the same thing." He held her stare this time. "No," he agreed. They sat like that for a long moment. People moved around them. Cups clinked. Someone laughed near the counter. The world continued. "I won't pretend to be in love with you," she said. "I'm not asking for that. And I won't let anyone speak about you like you're some tragic man who lost everything." His brow furrowed. "I'm not tragic." She didn't smile. Good. He felt something shift again. Not relief. Not victory. More like recognition. She wasn't agreeing out of need. She was choosing. Just the wedding, she said. After that, I decide what happens. He nodded once. Agreed. She picked up her cup and finished the rest of the coffee in one steady swallow. When do we start? She asked. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, a small, quiet unease settled in his stomach. Because for the first time since the invitation arrived, he realized this wasn't just about being seen. It was about being measured. And he wasn't entirely sure how he would stand up to that. He hadn't expected it to feel so normal. That was what unsettled him first. He gave her the guest room. Fresh sheets. A closet cleared out in a hurry that morning. He told himself it was temporary, practical. A week. The house had been quiet for months. After the divorce, he had left most of it untouched. Her side of the closet still empty. A few framed photos removed, but faint squares remained on the walls where sunlight hadn't reached. Leela walked through the hallway slowly the first evening, not snooping, not curious in an obvious way, just noticing. You don't like moving things, she said, pausing near the living room. It wasn't judgment, just observation. I move what needs to be moved, he replied. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the bookshelf, then withdrew her hand as if she had crossed a line. He showed her the bathroom, the kitchen, where he kept extra towels. He didn't show her the bedroom. She didn't ask. That night, he heard her moving around in the guest room, the sound of a drawer opening, water running. Then silence. He lay awake longer than he admitted to himself. This is controlled, he thought. There were boundaries. Clear ones. The next morning, she was already up when he came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with that same notebook, his mug in front of her, steam curling upward. He paused at the doorway. She looked different in daylight. Cleaner. She had washed her hair, tied it back again, but tighter this time. I made coffee, she said. He nodded. Thank you. He poured himself a cup and sat across from her. The distance between them felt less defined inside his own house. I need to take you shopping, he said after a moment, for the wedding. She closed the notebook. I don't need something expensive. He hesitated. It's not about the price. Her eyes held his. I know. They went that afternoon. He chose a boutique far enough from their usual areas. He didn't want to run into anyone who might recognize him. That thought lingered longer than it should have. Inside the store, Leela stood still while a saleswoman circled her with measuring tape. Adrian watched from a nearby chair, trying to appear detached. He caught his reflection in the mirror behind the racks. He looked composed, confident. He adjusted his posture anyway. Lila tried on 3 dresses. The first was too ornate. The second, too bright. The third was simple, deep blue. It followed her shape without exaggerating it. When she stepped out of the dressing room, the air shifted slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. He stood without realizing he had. She didn't smile at her reflection. She looked at herself carefully, as if checking whether she still recognized the person in the mirror. Well, the saleswoman prompted. Lila's gaze flicked to Adrian. He cleared his throat. It fits, he said. The saleswoman laughed lightly. That's all? He felt heat rise in his neck. It's right, he corrected. Lila studied him for another second, then turned back to the mirror. I'll take it, she said quietly. He paid without looking at the total. On the drive home, she rested her hand against the window, watching the city pass by. You don't like this, she said suddenly. What? Spending money to prove something. He kept his eyes on the road. It's not about proving. She didn't respond. At a red light, he glanced at her. Is it? She asked. He didn't answer before the light turned green. That night, they ate at the kitchen counter. Simple food. Pasta. Nothing ceremonial. She didn't fill the silence with chatter. That unsettled him more than if she had. He was used to noise. So, she said finally, twirling her fork slowly, what happens if she doesn't care? He stiffened slightly. She will? You sound sure. I know her. Lila tilted her head. Or you knew her. The correction lingered. He set his fork down. She invited me, he said. She wants me to see. To see what? He looked at his hands. That she chose better. Leela didn't respond immediately. After a moment she said, better at what? He almost snapped back with something sharp. But the question wasn't an attack. He exhaled. She always wanted more. And you didn't? I wanted enough. The difference felt obvious to him. It might not have been to her. She leaned back slightly in her chair. And now? He didn't like the way the conversation kept turning toward him. Now what? Do you want more? The question followed him upstairs later that night. He stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the collar of a shirt he didn't need to adjust. Did he want more? He wanted respect. He wanted not to be compared. He wanted to walk into that room and not feel reduced. He didn't say any of that out loud. The days before the wedding moved in a strange rhythm. He continued working, taking calls, signing documents. Leela stayed mostly inside during the day, reading, writing, occasionally stepping out for a walk around the block. He offered to give her money for personal things. She refused twice before accepting once, reluctantly. Not as payment, he clarified. She looked at him steadily. Then what? He didn't know. By Thursday, something in the house felt different, less hollow, not warmer exactly, just occupied. He caught himself listening for her movements. One evening, he found her in the backyard, sitting on the low stone wall near the fence, the sky above them dimming toward gray. You could still change your mind, she said without turning. He stepped beside her. So could you. She nodded once. They stood there in the cooling air. This won't fix anything, she added. I know. He said it too quickly. She glanced at him. You don't. He felt irritation flicker. You agreed, he reminded her. Yes, she said. I did. Not defensive, not apologetic, just certain. He rubbed his hands together to warm them. I'm not asking for a miracle, he said. No, she agreed. You're asking for an image. The words settled heavily between them. He didn't deny it, and that unsettled him more than anything else she'd said so far. The morning of the wedding arrived too quietly. No storm, no dramatic sky, just pale light slipping through the curtains like any other Saturday. Adrian woke before his alarm. For a few seconds, he didn't remember what day it was. Then the weight returned. Not sharp, just present. He lay still, listening. The house made small sounds as it always did. Pipes adjusting, a faint hum from the refrigerator downstairs, then footsteps in the hallway. He sat up. He hadn't told her what time they needed to leave. He assumed she would ask. She didn't. When he came downstairs, she was already dressed. Not in the blue gown, just jeans and a plain sweater. Her hair pinned back more carefully than usual. There was a steadiness about her that made him feel slightly off balance. You sleep? She asked. Enough. She nodded once. He poured coffee but didn't drink it. There was nothing left to prepare. The suit had been pressed, shoes polished, the invitation placed neatly on the entry table. Still, he checked his watch twice. Leela stood near the living room window, looking out at the street, cars passing. Ordinary lives continuing. You don't have to perform for me, she said without turning. He stiffened slightly. I'm not performing. Her reflection in the glass met his eyes. All right. The drive to the venue was longer than he remembered from the map. Or maybe time stretched differently that morning. He kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting too stiffly near the gear shift. She didn't try to fill the silence. About 10 minutes in, she said, Tell me something honest. He glanced at her briefly. About what? About her. He hesitated. She was ambitious, he said after a moment. Driven. That's not a flaw. I didn't say it was. Then what was? He swallowed. We started wanting the same things. Or I thought we did. A house. Stability. Work that mattered. And And somewhere along the way, that wasn't enough for her. Leela looked down at her hands folded neatly in her lap. Or it wasn't enough for you, she said softly. He almost braked too hard at a yellow light. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? He didn't respond. They drove the rest of the way without speaking. The venue appeared gradually through tall iron gates. A sprawling estate, white stone, glass windows reflecting the late morning sun. Valets in dark suits moved with rehearsed precision. Adrian pulled up and handed over his keys without hesitation. He felt Lila's presence beside him as they stepped onto the gravel driveway. The place smelled faintly of cut flowers and polished wood. Guests were already arriving. Women in silk, men in tailored jackets. Soft laughter carried across the courtyard. He felt it then. Comparison. It moved through him before he could stop it. He straightened slightly. Lila touched his arm, not dramatically. Just a brief pressure. He looked down at her hand. I'm not here to make you look bigger, she said quietly. I'm here to stand. He nodded once. Inside, the room was filled with light, chandeliers casting reflections across the marble floor, waiters circulating with trays of champagne. He recognized a few faces. Old colleagues, mutual friends who tried not to stare too openly. He felt their eyes anyway. He placed his hand lightly at the small of Lila's back as they moved through the room. Not possessive, just visible. It worked. He saw it in the way conversations paused half a second too long, in the subtle narrowing of glances. Who is she? That question moved across the room without being spoken. He felt steadier. Then he saw her. His ex-wife stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a small group. White dress fitted perfectly. Hair styled with careful effort that still looked effortless. She looked happy. That detail caught him off guard. Not triumphant, not sharp, just settled. Beside her stood the man, tall, relaxed posture, hand resting lightly at her waist. Adrian studied him quickly. The suit was immaculate. The watch, subtle but unmistakably expensive. He didn't look arrogant. That bothered Adrian more than arrogance would have. His ex-wife's eyes moved through the room in slow sweeps. When they landed on Adrian, there was a flicker of something. Surprise, maybe. Then she noticed Lila. The flicker sharpened. It was small, almost polite. But it was there. Adrian felt it like a quiet victory. He inclined his head slightly. Controlled. Calm. She approached. Each step measured. Adrian, she said when she reached them. Her voice hadn't changed. He nodded. You look well. So do you. Her gaze shifted to Lila. And this is? He felt Lila's spine straighten slightly beside him. Lila, Adrian said, we've been seeing each other. The words left his mouth smoothly. Too smoothly. His ex-wife's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Have you? She said lightly. The billionaire extended his hand. Daniel. Adrian shook it. Firm. Even. Congratulations, Adrian said. Daniel thanked him politely. No condescension, no display. That steadiness unsettled Adrian again. His ex-wife turned back to Lila. It's nice to meet you. You too, Lila replied. Simple. No performance. There was a brief pause. Adrian felt it. The room listening without appearing to listen. How did you two meet? His ex-wife asked. It sounded casual. It wasn't. Adrian felt his jaw tighten slightly. He had thought about this answer. Rehearsed something vague but impressive. Before he could speak, Lila answered. Through a conversation, she said. Adrian glanced at her. His ex-wife tilted her head slightly. What kind of conversation? Lila didn't look away. One that wasn't about money. The words landed gently, but they landed. A faint shift passed through his ex-wife's expression. Not anger, something closer to confusion. Daniel's grip at her waist tightened slightly. Adrian felt a pulse of something he couldn't quite name. This was working. He could see it. He could feel the balance shifting. For a moment, he almost relaxed. Then his ex-wife's eyes returned to him, not Lila. And there was something there he hadn't prepared for. Not jealousy. Not regret. Assessment. as if she were looking at him and trying to understand what had changed. He held her gaze, and for the first time since stepping into the estate, he felt unsure of what she was seeing. The ceremony passed in a blur of polite clapping and controlled breathing. Adrian stood near the back beside Lila, hands folded loosely in front of him, posture steady. He watched his ex-wife walk down the aisle without letting his expression move. She looked certain. That word pressed against him harder than he expected. Certain. When she reached Daniel, their hands met easily. No hesitation, no searching. Adrian felt something tighten under his ribs. Not pain exactly, more like a quiet acknowledgement. This is real. He didn't look at Lila. He didn't want to see whether she was studying him. When the vows ended and applause filled the room, he joined in at the same rhythm as everyone else. Not slower, not faster, measured. The reception shifted the mood. Music softened the edges of conversation. Glasses clinked. Lasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in controlled waves. Adrian kept his hand at Lila's back again as they moved through the crowd. He introduced her to two former colleagues, a distant cousin of his ex-wife. Each time he used the same calm tone. This is Lila. Not over-explained, not defensive. He noticed how people reacted. Quick calculations behind their smiles. She doesn't look like his type. He doesn't usually date someone like that. What does she do? The questions hovered without being asked directly. Lila handled it quietly. Short answers, no embellishment. When someone asked what she did for work, she said, "I write." It was true. It was also incomplete. Adrian felt a strange flicker of pride at that. Halfway through the reception, he stepped aside to take a call. It wasn't urgent. He could have ignored it, but the noise inside the hall had begun to feel too thick. He moved toward a quieter corridor lined with tall windows. He didn't answer the phone right away. He just stood there. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Suit sharp, expression controlled. "You look fine," he told himself. "So why does it feel like something's slipping?" The call ended quickly. Work detail. Minor issue. When he returned to the main room, he didn't see Lila immediately. His chest tightened before he could stop it. He scanned the crowd. Then he spotted her near one of the side tables, speaking with a woman in a pale green dress. His ex-wife's friend. Someone who had always been overly observant. Lila stood straight, hands relaxed at her sides. The friend's expression, however, was less relaxed. Adrian slowed his pace without meaning to. He couldn't hear the full conversation at first, just fragments carried by the space between guests. "How long have you known Adrian?" "Not long," Lila replied evenly. "And what did you say you did?" "I write." "Yes, but where?" There it was. Adrian felt the air shift. The friend leaned in slightly. "You must forgive me," she continued lightly. "I just don't remember seeing you at any of the events before." Lila's posture didn't change. "That's because I wasn't there." A faint smile from the friend. "Of course. And how did you two meet again?" Adrian reached them just as Lila answered. "Outside a closed cafe." The friend blinked. "I'm sorry?" "It was cold," Lila continued calmly. "He offered coffee." The friend's smile thinned. Adrian felt his pulse climb. "That's enough," he said lightly, stepping beside Lila. The friend looked between them. "A closed cafe," she repeated. "Timing is everything," Lila replied. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't playful. It was honest. Too honest. The friend's eyes sharpened. "And you just started dating?" There was no accusation in her tone. Not directly. But the question carried weight. Adrian felt something in his chest begin to crack. He had prepared for envy. He had not prepared for scrutiny. "Yes," he said smoothly. "We did." The friend studied him now. Something in her expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion. "And you live where, Lila?" Adrian felt the question land before Lila did. "There it is." He opened his mouth. Lila spoke first. "I was between places," she said. Silence. The word was gentle, but it rippled outward. "Between?" the friend echoed. Lila didn't blink. Homeless, she clarified quietly. The word didn't shatter the room. It didn't need to. It moved differently, like a crack spreading under polished tile. The friend's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. "Oh," she said. That single syllable carried more than sympathy. It carried dismissal. Adrian felt heat surge through him. "We don't need to discuss this," he said sharply. But it was too late. The friend's voice had lowered, but the people nearest them had already noticed the shift in tone. "And Adrian," she added softly. "You found her. Where exactly?" He felt something collapse inward. Lila turned to him then, not accusing, not apologizing, just looking. He realized in that instant that he had never told her what to say if someone asked directly, because he hadn't believed anyone would. He had underestimated the room. The friend's gaze flicked between them. "You brought her here," she said, understanding dawning slowly. "To this?" Adrian's throat tightened. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" The words weren't cruel. They were worse. They were curious. People nearby had grown quieter, not obviously, but enough. He felt the performance unraveling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to stand tall, composed, untouched. Instead, he felt exposed in a way he hadn't predicted. Lila stepped slightly forward. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he muttered under his breath. She didn't look at him. "I'm not ashamed," she said calmly. The friend folded her arms. "That's not the point." "No," Lila agreed softly. "It isn't." Adrian's pulse pounded in his ears. He could feel eyes turning. He could feel the shift. And for the first time since he conceived the idea, he understood something clearly. He had brought her here thinking he controlled the story. He didn't. Not anymore. The room hadn't gone silent. It just changed its breathing. Music still played. Glasses still touched. But the space around them tightened, as if the air had drawn closer to listen. Adrian could feel it along his shoulders. The friend gave a small, almost pitying smile. "Oh, sweetheart," she said to Lila, voice dipped in softness that wasn't kind. "No one's saying you should be ashamed." That tone, Adrian felt it like a slap. Lila didn't flinch. She looked at the woman carefully, as if deciding whether this moment deserved effort. "I know," she said. The simplicity unsettled the friend more than defense would have. Adrian stepped forward. "This is inappropriate," he said, keeping his voice level. "We're guests." The friend raised her brows. "Of course you are." There it was again. Not loud. Not rude. Worse. Daniel appeared beside them then, drawn by the shift. His presence was steady, not aggressive. He looked first at Adrian, then at Lila. "Is there a problem?" he asked. His voice carried easily without rising. Adrian hated that about him. "No," Adrian replied quickly. "There isn't." But Lila spoke at the same time. "There doesn't need to be." Daniel's eyes settled on her. Not dismissive, just curious. "I hope you're comfortable here," he said. It sounded genuine. That unsettled Adrian even more. Lila met his gaze. "I'm fine." A pause. Then the friend added, lightly, "Lila was just telling us how she and Adrian met." Daniel looked between them. "Oh?" Adrian felt the heat reach his face. He could stop this. He could laugh it off. Say something vague. Redirect. But something in him had frozen. Lila exhaled softly. "He offered me coffee," she said. Daniel waited. "That's it?" he asked. "That's how it started," she replied. The friend gave a soft laugh. "And he just invited you to a wedding like this?" The question floated. It didn't sound accusing. It sounded fascinated. Lila glanced at Adrian then. Just for a second. He saw it clearly. She was deciding whether to protect him or not. He held her gaze. His jaw tightened slightly. Not in warning. Not exactly. Just bracing. Lila turned back to the small circle. "He didn't invite me because of this place," she said calmly. "He invited me because he didn't want to be here alone. The words landed gently. Too gently. Daniel's expression didn't change much. But Adrian saw the flicker in his ex-wife's eyes across the room. She had been watching. She had heard enough. The friend tilted her head. So this is what? A statement? No, Leela said. It's a decision. Adrian felt something shift under his ribs. You're very honest, Daniel observed. Yes. No apology. No hesitation. The friend's smile faded slightly. And you're comfortable admitting you were homeless? She asked. Lila's eyes sharpened, not with anger, but with clarity. I was, she said. I am not ashamed of that. The friend folded her arms tighter. Still, she murmured, it's unusual. Adrian doesn't typically. Typically what? Lila asked quietly. The question cut through. The friend hesitated. Daniel stepped in before she could answer. Adrian, he said, turning to him now, if there's something we should know, it's better not to let rumors build. Rumors. The word scraped. Adrian felt his throat close slightly. He could feel every eye within 10 feet of them. He had wanted to walk into this room and feel taller. Instead, he felt stripped. She's my guest, he said, voice steady but thinner than before. That wasn't the question, the friend replied. Lila moved then. Not away. Forward. Adrian didn't rescue me, she said clearly. And I'm not here to make anyone jealous. Silence tightened. She continued. He saw me. That's all. Daniel studied her carefully. And what do you see? He asked. The question wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was direct. Lila didn't look at Adrian this time before answering. I see a man who works hard, she said, who doesn't talk about it, who doesn't measure himself by headlines. Adrian felt something break open in his chest. She wasn't embellishing. She wasn't romanticizing. She was stating it plainly. And, she added, voice still level, I see someone who thought bringing me here would prove he hasn't lost. There it was. No drama. No raised voice. Just truth. The friend blinked. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. Across the room, his ex-wife's face had gone very still. Adrian felt heat rush up his neck again. Lila, he said quietly. She turned to him now. Her eyes weren't accusing. They were steady. You don't need to win, she said softly. Not like this. The words pressed into him harder than anything said before. Not because they were loud, because they were precise. Daniel glanced toward Adrian's ex-wife, then back at him. For what it's worth, Daniel said, voice measured, no one here thinks you lost. Adrian almost laughed. The irony was sharp. That wasn't the point. He had thought this was about perception, about status, about image. But standing there, under the weight of Leila's honesty, he realized something uncomfortable. He hadn't been trying to prove something to his ex-wife. He had been trying to prove it to himself. The friend shifted awkwardly. Well, she said lightly, this has been enlightening. People began to disperse subtly. Conversations restarting around them, pretending nothing had happened. The moment didn't explode. It didn't need to. It lingered. Adrian looked at Lila. She hadn't exposed him cruelly. She hadn't humiliated him. She had simply refused to lie. And in doing that, she had held his dignity more carefully than he had. His ex-wife approached then, her steps slower than before. Adrian, she said quietly. He turned. For a second, they just looked at each other. I didn't invite you to compete, she said. I know. You ended it, she added gently. Remember? He did. He remembered signing the papers, telling himself it was the right thing, that they had grown in different directions. He had been calm then. He wasn't calm now. I didn't marry Daniel because he has money, she said softly. I married him because he wanted the life I wanted. The words didn't sting. They settled. He nodded once. I hope you're happy, he said. She studied him carefully. I am. There was no cruelty in it, just certainty again. She glanced at Lila. She's right, his ex-wife added quietly. You never needed to prove anything. Then she stepped back, returning to the room that now belonged to her. Adrian stood there a moment longer. The music resumed its place in the air. Conversations rebuilt themselves. But something inside him had shifted in a way that felt irreversible. He looked at Lila. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for bringing her. For the reason he had." She held his gaze. "I know. No anger. No triumph. Just acknowledgement." For the first time that day he felt small. Not in front of the room, inside himself. And it didn't feel like humiliation. It felt like clarity. They left before the cake was cut. No announcement. No scene. Adrian walked beside her through the courtyard, gravel shifting under his shoes. The late afternoon light had softened. The estate looked almost gentle now, like it hadn't held anything sharp at all. The valet brought the car around. Adrian thanked him. His voice sounded normal. Too normal. Once inside, he closed the door and just sat there for a second, hands on the wheel, engine off. He didn't start the car right away. Lila didn't rush him. The silence inside the vehicle felt different than the silences in the house had felt. This one was heavier. Earned. He finally turned the key. They drove past the iron gates. The estate disappeared behind them. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. He replayed the moment in his head. The friend's tone. Daniel's calm. His ex-wife's certainty. But mostly, Lila's voice. "You don't need to win." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel slightly. "I didn't expect that," he said at last. "No," she replied. He almost smiled at that. Traffic slowed near an intersection. A red light held them in place. "I thought it would feel different," he admitted. "How?" "Like balance." She watched the street ahead. "And did it?" He shook his head once. "No." The light changed. He drove. "I'm not angry," he said after a moment, more to himself than to her. "I know." He glanced at her. "You do?" "Yes." She folded her hands loosely in her lap. "You're disappointed," she added. The word settled. He let out a slow breath. Yes, not at her. At himself. They reached the house before sunset. The familiar driveway felt quieter than usual. Smaller. Inside, he loosened his tie and placed it carefully on the entry table. The suit jacket followed. Lila disappeared upstairs without a word. He heard the soft click of the guest room door. He stood alone in the living room. The house felt different again. Not hollow this time, just honest. He moved into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. His reflection in the darkened window looked older than it had that morning. He had gone there to provoke something. Jealousy. Regret. Doubt. He hadn't found any of it. What he found instead was harder to name. He pushed away from the counter and walked upstairs. He paused outside the guest room door. For a second he considered not knocking, then he did. A soft knock. Controlled. "Come in," she said. She had changed out of the blue dress. It hung neatly over the back of a chair. She was back in simple clothes. The makeup she had worn was mostly washed away. She looked smaller somehow. Or maybe just less armored. "I'm not upset with you," he said immediately. She tilted her head slightly. "I didn't assume you were." He stepped inside, but didn't sit. "I should have told you exactly what this was," he said. "You did." "No," he corrected. "I dressed it up." She studied him for a moment. "Yes," she agreed. The honesty wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't think it would matter." "It always matters," she said quietly. He swallowed. "I didn't mean to put you in that position." She glanced at the dress. "I chose to be there." "That doesn't make it fair." She held his gaze. "I don't need fairness from you." The sentence caught him off guard. "What do you need?" he asked before he could stop himself. She thought about that longer than he expected. "Not to be used as proof," she said finally. The words didn't accuse. They defined. He felt them settle into him. I see that now, he admitted. Silence. The air between them didn't feel tense, just clear. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said. The words hit faster than he anticipated. You don't have to. Yes, she replied gently. I do. He looked down at the floor for a second. You said after the wedding you'd decide, he said. I did. And I won't stay where I'm part of someone else's argument. The sentence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He felt something tighten in his chest again. Not panic, not desperation. Regret. I wasn't arguing with her, he said. She gave him a small look. You were arguing with yourself. That landed cleanly. He didn't defend himself. Because she was right. He had stood in that room trying to prove that he hadn't been left behind. That he was still desirable. Still chosen. But none of it had been about her. Or even about his ex-wife. It had been about the quiet fear he hadn't named. That he wasn't enough. He sat down on the edge of the desk chair. I don't measure myself by money, he said slowly. I know. But I measure myself by comparison. She didn't respond. He let the words sit in the air. I thought bringing you would make me look steady. And did it? She asked. He shook his head. It made me look unsure. She nodded once. Because you were. There was no cruelty in it. Just truth again. He looked at her properly then. You defended me, he said quietly. I told the truth. You didn't have to. Yes, she said softly. I did. He frowned slightly. Why? She hesitated. Because you're not what they thought you were. And what's that? A man desperate to compete. He exhaled slowly. Wasn't I? She considered him carefully. Yes, she said, but not cruel. That distinction settled somewhere deep. He didn't know what to do with it yet. They sat in silence for a long moment. Not strained, just thinking. I'll make sure you have somewhere safe, he said eventually. I'll manage, she replied. I know you will. He stood. Thank you, he added. For what? For not letting me lie. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. He left the room quietly. That night he didn't sleep much. Not because of shame. Because of recognition. He saw the pattern clearly now. The way he avoided attention but still needed validation. The way he told himself he didn't care about status while quietly comparing his life to others. He had ended his marriage because he didn't want to chase something he didn't believe in. But somewhere along the way, he had started chasing anyway, just in silence. The house felt still around him. In the guest room, he heard nothing. And for the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like space. Space to decide who he was without anyone watching. He woke before sunrise, not from noise, from habit. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle into him. The events of the day before didn't rush back all at once. They arrived slowly. A sentence here, a look there. You don't need to win. He sat up and swung his feet to the floor. The house felt paused, as if it, too, was waiting. When he stepped into the hallway, he saw the guest room door already open. He stopped. The bed was made, neatly. The blue dress was gone. The small space on the dresser where her notebook had rested was empty. He walked downstairs without hurrying. She was in the kitchen, standing by the sink. Morning light stretched across the counter. She had a small bag at her feet. You were going to leave without saying anything, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. She turned off the faucet and faced him. I wasn't sure what else needed to be said. He nodded slowly. That's fair. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking this time, set one near her. She wrapped her hands around it the same way she had in the cafe. I meant what I said, he began. About making sure you're safe. She gave a small, almost tired smile. I've been surviving a long time, Adrian. I know. But I appreciate it. He leaned back against the counter. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It just held weight. I didn't invite you because I thought you were small, he said after a moment. I know. I invited you because I felt small. She didn't answer immediately. That's different, she said finally. Yes. He looked at her properly. I thought standing next to someone composed would make me feel the same. And it doesn't work that way. No, she agreed. He rubbed a hand over his face. I built my company from nothing, he said. No investors, no headlines, just work. I've always been proud of that. You should be. But when she started wanting more, he paused, searching for the right words. I told myself I didn't care, that chasing scale and recognition wasn't my priority. And was it? He hesitated. Part of me wanted to prove I could have it if I tried. She watched him carefully. But you didn't try, she said. No. Why? He let out a slow breath. Because I didn't want to become someone who needed applause. The words felt raw. She nodded. But you still wanted to know you were worth applauding. He looked at her. Yes. There was no judgment in her expression. That's human, she said. He almost laughed at that. It doesn't feel like it. It is. She took a sip of coffee. Money isn't the issue, she continued. Neither is ambition. What is? He asked quietly. Fear, she said. He didn't argue. She stepped away from the counter and picked up her bag. You're afraid that choosing a quieter life means you weren't capable of the louder one. The sentence landed cleanly. He stared at her. That's not, he stopped himself. It was. He had framed his decisions as values, integrity, simplicity, focus, and they were those things. But underneath them, there had always been a small question. Could I have competed in that world? He had never tested it. Not fully. He met her eyes. And what if I couldn't? He asked. She shrugged lightly. Then you build the life that fits you. He felt something shift inside him again. Not dramatic, just steady. And you? He asked. What fits you? She considered that. Not being pitied, she said first. He nodded. Not being someone's lesson. He swallowed. I'm sorry. She shook her head gently. You didn't treat me like that. Not really. Not really isn't the same as never. She held his gaze. No, she agreed. He stepped forward slightly. Let me help you properly, he said. Not as a symbol, not as proof. She watched him. How? He thought for a moment. There's an apartment above my office, he said slowly. It's used for visiting consultants sometimes. It's empty most of the year. She didn't interrupt. You can stay there, he continued. No conditions, no expectations, just stability while you figure out your next step. She studied him carefully. And what's your next step? She asked. The question lingered. He looked around the kitchen, the house, the quiet that had once felt heavy and now felt honest. I think, he said slowly, I need to stop proving things to people who aren't asking. She nodded once. That's a start. They stood there for a moment longer. No grand gesture. No dramatic reconciliation. Just two people in a quiet kitchen deciding not to use each other. I'll take the apartment, she said finally. Relief moved through him not because she was staying in his orbit, but because it felt right. Thank you, he said. For the space, she replied. They drove together to his office building later that morning. The city looked different in daylight. Less symbolic. Just concrete and movement. He showed her the apartment. Simple. Clean. Windows facing east. It's not much, he said. It's enough, she replied. She set her bag down near the door. He didn't linger. At the threshold, he paused. I meant what I said yesterday, he told her. You saw me. She looked at him steadily. You let me. He nodded. Then he left. Back in his office downstairs, he closed the door and sat at his desk. The building was quiet on weekends. No staff, no noise. He opened his laptop but didn't look at it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and let the silence stretch. He thought about the estate, the chandeliers, the certainty in his ex-wife's face. He thought about Daniel's calm. He felt no anger toward either of them, just distance. He realized something then. He had mistaken visibility for value. He had believed that if something wasn't publicly admired, it wasn't fully real. But the work he did, bridges, foundations, structures that held weight quietly, didn't need applause to stand. He had known that once. Somewhere along the way, he had let comparison blur it. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the street. People moved below, unaware of him. He felt lighter, not triumphant, just unburdened from something he hadn't admitted he was carrying. Upstairs, Lila was unpacking into a small apartment that wasn't glamorous, but it was hers for now. And he wasn't standing beside her to make a point. He was simply making room for her, for himself, and for a version of his life that didn't need an audience. The first week passed without announcement. Adrian didn't visit the apartment upstairs, not immediately. He left the key card at the front desk with a short note written in his usual plain handwriting. Use what you need. Utilities are covered. No rush. He signed only his name. He wasn't trying to be distant. He was trying to be careful. The office resumed its rhythm on Monday. Meetings, site inspections, numbers, deadlines. People spoke to him the way they always had, direct, respectful, sometimes impatient. Nothing in his professional world had shifted, but inside him, something had. He noticed it in small moments. When a colleague mentioned a competitor landing a high-profile contract, he felt the old flicker of comparison start to rise. It didn't take hold. It just passed through. On Wednesday afternoon, he stepped out of his office and found Lila sitting in the reception area downstairs. She wasn't waiting for him specifically. She had a folder in her hands. She looked up when she sensed him. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said. "You're not," he replied. His assistant glanced between them, curious but discreet. They stepped into the hallway. "I've been looking at community colleges," she said, holding out the folder slightly. "Writing programs, editing work." He took the folder but didn't open it. "That's good." "I'll need a part-time job," she added. "I won't stay upstairs for free." "You don't owe, I know," she said gently. "But I need to." He nodded. That made sense. They stood there for a moment, not sure whether to say more. "How's the apartment?" he asked. "Quiet," she replied. "In a good way." He understood that. She shifted her weight slightly. "I've been thinking about something," she said. He waited. "You were right about one thing." He almost smiled. "Only one?" She allowed a faint curve at the corner of her mouth. "You don't measure yourself by money." He didn't respond immediately. "Not really," she continued. "You measure yourself by usefulness." The word caught him off guard. "Usefulness?" he repeated. "You build things that hold," she said simply. "That's how you see yourself." He felt the truth of that settle. "And when your marriage ended," she added, "you couldn't fix it." The sentence wasn't cruel. It was precise. He exhaled slowly. "No," he said, "I couldn't. So you tried to fix how it looked instead." He met her eyes. Yes. There was no point pretending otherwise. She took the folder back from him. "I'm not your structure to reinforce," she said softly. "I know. And you're not a failed one." That stayed with him long after she went back upstairs. A month passed. Leela found part-time work at a bookstore 2 blocks from the office. The pay wasn't impressive. She didn't complain. In the evenings, she attended a writing workshop twice a week. Adrian kept his distance, but not his absence. Sometimes they crossed paths in the stairwell. Sometimes he brought up leftover food without making it an event. Their conversations shifted, less about the wedding, less about the past, more about what came next. One evening she knocked on his office door after hours. He looked up from his desk. "Do you have a minute?" He nodded. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I got accepted," she said. "For the program?" "Yes." He felt a small, genuine smile form. "That's good. I start in the fall. That's soon." She nodded. "It's in another city." The words settled. He leaned back in his chair. "How far?" "3 hours. Not across the country, but far enough." He nodded slowly. "You should go." She studied him carefully. "I am." There was no tension in the room. No drama. Just acknowledgement. "I won't be upstairs much longer," she added. He understood. "That was always the point," he said. "Yes." She hesitated slightly. "I'm not leaving because of what happened at the wedding." "I know." "I'm leaving because I don't want that to be the most important chapter of my life." He felt something warm and steady in his chest. "It won't be," he said. She looked at him a moment longer. "And yours?" she asked. He considered that. "I think I've been building structures for years," he said slowly, "but I haven't built much inside myself." She didn't interrupt. "I avoided scale because I didn't want ego to shape my work," he continued. "But I also avoided risk." "That's different," she said. "Yes." He nodded. "I'm thinking about expanding," he admitted. "Not for headlines, not to compete, just because we can handle more." She watched him carefully. "That sounds like growth," she said, "not comparison." "Good." Silence settled again, but it felt clean. She moved toward the door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For the coffee." He almost laughed. "That was a long time ago." "No," she said. "It wasn't." Then she left. He sat there for a long time after she was gone. Not replaying the wedding, not replaying the embarrassment, but remembering the first moment outside the cafe. The way she had looked at him without assumption. He realized something then. He hadn't needed someone impressive to stand beside him. He had needed someone honest. And now he needed to be that for himself. The day she left, it rained. Not heavily, just steady enough to blur the edges of the city. Adrian stood under the awning outside the office building while she loaded the last of her things into the back seat of a small used car she had bought 2 weeks earlier. 2 suitcases, a box of books, the notebook. He hadn't insisted on driving her. She hadn't asked. They moved without rushing. The street smelled like wet pavement and exhaust. "You'll call when you get there," he said. "I will." He nodded once. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that marked the shift. Nothing came, so he stepped forward and opened the car door for her. She paused before getting in. "You know," she said, looking at him carefully, "I never thought of you as insecure." He almost smiled at that. "I was," he said. "Yes," she agreed, "but quietly." He let out a soft breath. "That's worse." "Not necessarily." She studied him one last time. "You just didn't want to be ordinary." The word didn't sting the way it once might have. "I still don't," he admitted. "That's fine," she said. "Just don't confuse ordinary with unseen." He held her gaze. "I won't." She got into the car. The door closed with a soft, final sound. He stepped back as she started the engine. There was no wave, just a brief lift of her chin. Then she pulled into traffic and was gone. He stood there a few seconds longer than necessary. The rain dampened his jacket. He didn't move. 3 hours, he thought, close enough to visit, far enough not to interfere. He went back inside. The office felt the same as it always had. Fluorescent lights, the faint hum of computers, the smell of paper and metal, but he felt different walking through it. Not taller, just steadier. Over the next months, he made decisions he had postponed for years. He took on a larger municipal project that required expanding his team. Not flashy, but complex. It would stretch them. He didn't announce it publicly. He didn't frame it as ambition fulfilled. He simply said yes. When investors approached, He listened instead of dismissing them outright. He asked questions without feeling threatened, not to impress anyone, to understand what he wanted. Some evenings, when the office emptied out, he would sit alone at his desk and think about the estate, the chandeliers, the marble floors. He no longer felt the need to compare. His ex-wife's life was hers. Daniel's certainty belonged to him. Adrian had something else, work that held, a company that fed families, a building upstairs where someone had started again. He received a letter from Lila 3 months after she left. Not an email. A letter. Her handwriting was still steady. She wrote about her classes, about the way words felt different when she wasn't writing to survive. She mentioned a small apartment with uneven floors and a window that stuck when it rained. She didn't romanticize it, she just described it. At the bottom she added one line. You were never competing with anyone but yourself. He read that sentence twice, then folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He didn't feel a rush of emotion, just recognition. He thought back to the moment in the reception hall when she had said he didn't need to win. At the time, it had felt like exposure. Now it felt like release. He had gone to that wedding believing dignity came from being seen as equal to someone wealthier. He left understanding that dignity came from standing without pretending. The difference was small on the outside, but inside it changed the way he moved through rooms. He no longer scanned for comparison first. He scanned for substance. Months later, he ran into his ex-wife at a professional conference. Not a social event, a panel discussion on urban development funding. She was there with Daniel. He greeted them calmly. No tension, no need to display anything. She looked at him with that same certainty as before, but this time he didn't measure himself against it. They spoke briefly about work. When she mentioned hearing about his company's recent expansion, her tone carried something new. Respect. Not because he had grown bigger, because he had grown. After they parted, he stood near a large window overlooking the city skyline. Glass towers reflected the afternoon sun. He thought about wealth, about visibility, about applause. None of it felt threatening anymore. He understood now that he had always been capable of building more. He had just needed to decide whether the growth came from fear or from purpose. Leela had chosen dignity in a room designed for display. He had almost missed the lesson. He didn't now. Late one evening, alone in his office, he walked upstairs to the apartment. It was empty again. Clean, quiet. He stepped inside and stood near the window. The city lights blinked on below. He didn't feel the urge to fill the space. He simply stood there. He had brought someone into his life to make a point. She left having made one instead. He didn't chase her. He didn't try to hold her in place as proof of anything. He let her go because that was what dignity required, and because he no longer needed a witness to believe he was enough. Outside, traffic moved steadily. Inside, he felt something settle fully for the first time in years. Not pride, not triumph, just self-respect. And it didn't need an audience.